It's great. I pinned this for Waveform because I want to talk about it, and there's just so much here. I tweeted actually probably like 2-3 weeks ago, and a lot of people were like roasting me about it, but I'm fine with it. Which is just that it seems like 75% of new smartphone presentations these days are just camera. And then I had a bunch of people going, well, all you ever talk about is a camera. I wasn't complaining. I was just saying that's true. That's one of the most, they'll go battery, spec, screen, camera feature, camera feature, camera feature, camera feature.
It's always at the end, and they usually seem to end on
so much time on camera. And it didn't always used to be this way. So I just kind of tweeted that thought out there, and then that was that.
Yeah.
So sure enough, last week, a tweet from a user named Lee94Josh showed up on my timeline, where he actually went back and watched every single iPhone keynote since the first one, and spent out, and he actually counted how much time was spent talking about the phone and how much of that time was specifically spent talking about the cameras. And he graphed it all out.
Yeah.
And now I want to go through this because this is now real evidence that more and more time has been spent talking about the cameras. So I guess we can just start with the first Apple event, right? The first Apple event was in 2007. It was kind of one of those iconic, like, massive things. But I don't know if you remember when we reviewed every single iPhone, the camera wasn't really a big feature on the iPhone in the first few.
Yeah.
So they didn't have much to talk about.
Well, because if you think about it, while smartphones were revolutionary and the iPhone kind of revolutionized smartphones, there were cameras in phones before that. Like, I had flip phones with cameras, and they were rough. And they were rough to look at.
Yeah, just like a basic 3-megapixel webcam, like nothing too crazy. Like, you could send a picture of like where you were to see. Yeah.
Or you just like, have a couple of things to scroll through on your little flip phone. But like, they were there, and the iPhone didn't upgrade that at all. That wasn't the focus on the first iPhone, for sure.
For sure. So the first iPhone, 2007, they spent 79 minutes talking about this new revolutionary product. To me, that seems about right. Like, they could spend an hour plus
I'm
easily.
honestly surprised not more if it's your first product, the first big product like that you're talking about.
It was good. It was good. And for those 79 minutes, they spent 10 seconds talking about the camera.
Let's look at the back. On the back, the biggest thing of note is we got a 2-megapixel camera built right in. The other side, and we're back on the front.
Sounds about right. Hey, it has a camera on the back. You can do X, Y, and Z with it. It's a good time. Moving on. That was 0.2% of the presentation. If you move up all the way now to iPhone 13 in 2021, they spent 33% of the entire presentation on the camera. That was a 42-minute presentation for the iPhone, which, that's the 13 mini, the 13 Max, 13 whatever.
Yeah.
And 14 of those minutes were spent talking about the camera. That's not actually the highest. The highest was in 2019, iPhone 11 spent 35%. But you can see clearly the last 3 years have been more than ever on the camera. You kind of see like the little brackets of 0%, then a bunch of teen percents, and then a bunch of 20%, and now the last 3 years are 30%.
Yeah.
But even inside of this, there's so many interesting ones.
Yeah.
If you're listening for audio right now, I beg you, come watch the video version of just this part.
Find the tweet at least so you have some reference.
So you can look at this graph. It's fascinating. Okay. My favorite one is probably the iPhone 3GS, because it's the longest ever that the iPhone 3G. Yeah. Longest they've ever spent in a presentation talking just iPhone. It's the first iPhone upgrade ever. It's the 3G one. They did a bunch of new stuff. 100 minutes
on presentation
on the new iPhone. Can you imagine 100 minutes on a new phone today? And they spent 3 seconds.
And that's one phone, not 4 phones. We're at 4 phones now, and they're spending 40 minutes.
Yeah, there was no mini plus to explain. It's just one new phone. 100 minutes of talking about a new upgrade. 3 seconds on the camera.
Yeah.
My favorite part, we have a clip of those 3 seconds, and we're going to play it right now. It's a generous 3 seconds.
Very.
The same gorgeous 3.5-inch display. Camera.
That was it.
Beautiful.
That was the whole that was the entire 3 seconds.
I think the context of it is they're pretty much just going through like what's on the camera.
Yeah.
Or what's on the iPhone.
Yeah.
But yeah, very generous. I think some of my favorite things to look at here are looking at the differences between 2 years adjacent to each other. So like there's kind of some big jumps, and then usually in those jumps you can find the thing, like what the upgrade was and why they were so impressed and like wanted to talk that much more about it. So like you went from the 3G to the 3GS, which was 3 seconds to 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Like that is a huge jump. You went from 0.05% to 25% of the entire, although the 3GS was only an 18-minute presentation, I believe. Was that WWDC that year?
Yeah. So 3GS was the first ever S upgrade. So you can imagine, all right, it's only an 18-minute presentation. Like we don't have a ton to say because it's the same design, but there's a few key things in this new design that are upgraded. One of them was this was the first ever camera upgrade. I think it went from 2 megapixels to 5, something like that.
I think, it looks like most of them were at 5, because then the first big jump was from the 4 to the 4S.
We did a graph. We have a graph of this. When I reviewed every iPhone.
Oh, did we? No, I do not have that graph.
Let me pull up that graph too. So we reviewed every iPhone, and at the end we had all these great charts. And if you've seen that video, then you've seen those charts. One of them was iPhone megapixel count over the years.
Oh, yeah?
And let me just see if I can fast forward. Yep, found it. And they had a 2 megapixel camera for the first 2 iPhones, and then the 3GS was the first ever upgrade, and it went to a 3 megapixel camera.
Boom. That 1 megapixel warranted an extra 4 minutes of talking about the camera. So
exactly.
Bravo.
But it's the one, like it's an S update, so there's not a lot new.
Yeah.
So only things they changed, I think, were speed. It was a new processor. Camera. It was an upgraded camera. And
so you have to talk about that for 25% of the presentation.
Yeah.
It seems like megapixel bump seems to be where we see a lot of these spikes. So from the 4 to the 4S, they doubled the time they talked about the cameras from 4 minutes to 8 minutes. And they also happened to bump the camera up to 8 megapixels that year. Then they did another bump from the 6 to the 6X. That was 8 to 12. But the selfie camera went from 1.2 megapixel to 5 megapixels.
So that was the thing I was going to mention about 4S. That was the first ever selfie camera.
Yes.
So they had to spend time talking about FaceTime and like what you can do with a front-facing camera.
But 3GS to 4, they spent less time. They went down in time talking about the camera. So maybe they focused more on talking about...
that was the new design.
FaceTime? New design? Okay.
Yeah, 4 was like, okay, now we're up to 52 minutes again, talking about all this new... This is the biggest, like, new-looking iPhone.
Yeah, so percentage-wise, they talked way less about it. But even in just pure time spoken, in the 3GS, 4 minutes, 30 seconds, in the iPhone 4, with a whole new camera, a selfie camera, first time, they spent 30 less seconds talking about it. I think that's the most fascinating decrease. And then while adding something. So that just seems to stand out to me a lot.
And then, the longest ever was iPhone 11, 20 minutes talking about just camera, which is massive. 20 minutes just about a camera.
So do you remember what 11 was, though?
11, so we got the ultra-wide for the first time?
Yes, but there was also, that's deep fusion too, right?
Oh.
And remember how long they talked about that for it to not even come out?
To be a small update later in a software
There was a very long... There's two main big camera like features I remember them talking about that took way longer in the explanation than I feel like warranted, and that was deep fusion and cinematic mode. Both of those had like insanely long extra pieces to the camera
with examples and low light shots and focus racking. Yep.
And I can't tell you a single person that I know, even in the tech world right now, that is like, oh, I love deep fusion or I love cinematic mode, or it's for how much time they spend with it. It doesn't seem like people care. I'm
just happy somebody actually went through and charted all this stuff, because I had the thought, and actually I had the thought because I was watching, I think I was in a briefing or some meeting where they were going over a phone, and I think this ratio is even higher with some other companies. I think it might have been either a OnePlus or a Xiaomi phone or something like that, where I think it was over half. I think clearly, easily over half of the presentation was camera, because they didn't have a whole lot of new stuff. It was like, here's a Snapdragon 8 Gen 1. It's fast. It cools. We have a high refresh rate screen and fast charging again. Camera feature, low light camera, video camera, high res mode, cinematic mode, portrait mode. Like they wanted to go over all the AI stuff, all the color they've been doing, tons and tons of camera features. And I was like, it at least was 75% of the slides. I'll put it that way. So yeah, this is what differentiates smartphones at the highest level. They're all pretty fast. They all have pretty good screens.
I would love to see, with all the phones taken into account, all the presentations taken into account, who was the longest? Like
who spent the most time?
Longest, and then who spent the most percentage-wise on one? Because I do feel like I remember somewhere it feels like they're only. I don't think it's OnePlus, because OnePlus also likes to focus on charging so much.
I just remember when they did the Hasselblad thing.
That was a lot.
They had to do so much camera stuff. They talked about Hasselblad. They talked about what the partnership meant,
guy in the
and
helicopter,
history,
and like everything.
all this camera. Even if they're not showing examples, they're just talking about Hasselblad and camera stuff.
And then Samsung, like 100x space zoom. They had who were the two guys that were like up by the bridge in San Francisco? Like
the demo with the 100x.
Yeah, like they do all those crazy demos, and it seems like it's focusing almost more on all the. It's kind of a shame because it's focusing more on these like collaborations they do to attempt to show it off, but it just turns into more of like a commercial and less about actually the camera and how normal people are using it. But there's a reason. People say this a lot to us too. Why do tech reviewers focus so much on the camera? And because honestly, it's the biggest gap you can see between a lot of phones. And the biggest thing, every single person who uses that phone, whether you're a huge tech head or a completely average Joe user, like you're going to be like, this camera looks better. Every time you buy a new phone, you're gonna be like, oh my goodness, these pictures are so much better.
Yeah. That's really what it comes down to for me. The biggest difference in phones in battery life will be like either, oh yeah, I can kill this one in a day, or yeah, this one has pretty good battery life. It'll last you longer than a day.
Yeah.
The biggest difference between speaker quality is what? Like, this one's not that loud. Oh, this one's nice and rich. Okay, great. But the difference in cameras is like, that's one feature that pretty much everyone uses at some point on their phone. A lot of people are like, I have kids. I want to be able to remember these like moments. I need it to have a good camera. And if it has a bad camera, it's going to ruin my whole phone experience. And some just don't have good cameras. Some are just not good for that type of thing. And some are better at it. Some are really good at it. And that's a really meaningful thing to a lot of people. I remember my 5 pillars of a great smartphone. For me as a reviewer, I narrowed it down to 5.
Yeah.
It was performance, battery, software, camera, and build quality, basically. And like, even as a reviewer, if it's only 5, I think for a normal person, they're like, I'm going to get this new phone. I need it to have a good battery, good screen, good camera. It's just 3. And it probably has to be an iPhone for most people. But like, that's software. So 3 or 4 things. So yeah, if it narrows down to 3 or 4 things, then those things are going to get the most airtime. And it turns out the camera is probably number 1.
And I think the fact that we are reviewing dozens and dozens of phones every single year and are still seeing these big differences in cameras, when you think of the average person upgrading 2 or 3 years down the line, that camera jump is going to be the biggest jump they encounter when they upgrade. Claire, usually I upgrade her with a phone that's like 2 years old every year. And every time she gets it, she's like, I can't believe how good this camera is. She takes pictures and she's like, this looks so good. Like, I'm so happy with this. And she's using like an S10e right now and is still amazed at the camera.
That's one of the funny things about like the way phones have gotten better is if you look at a phone 6 years ago, when it first came out, we were all like, does the battery last a whole day? Yeah, good. 6 years later, does the battery last a whole day? Yeah, okay, good. It's like the battery capacity had to change massively inside the phone to achieve the same goal.
Yeah.
And then same thing with like speakers. Like the screens are bigger and they look much better than 6 years ago. But if you show someone a photo from a camera from 6 years ago, from like an iPhone 6 versus a 13, it is a dramatic difference, especially video, all this stuff. That is consistently true about these things.
I go back and watch our old videos all the time, and it's like, it'll be videos raving about the camera, and I look at it and it's like,
it looks foggy.
Dear
like,
Lord. Did you clean that lens off before you took that picture?
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks so much for watching the clip. Waveform's actually going to launch its own EV, and we just need investment. So if you just click that big red button under it's subscribe, that's French for invest.
Right.
You might as well click it and you can just invest in our
Yes, so the product's great. It's basically just a Cybertruck and a Roadster and a Lucid Air all in one. It just is.
10,000 miles of range.
It just is.
4-minute wireless charging up to 200 meters away.
And we're also going to build our own wireless network.
Yeah, and we come in the front trunk when you order it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Every single one.
Click the red button. I don't know why you wouldn't.
How could you not?
It's a free investment.
Imagine not investing in this and then it blows up. Can you really afford to miss out on this?
You can't. I promise you can't.
Hit it.